Okay, students, in this final video, we're going to look at how to spawn custom waves of different types of enemies all at the same time. So I'm going to open up the area spawner that we made in our last video. And right now, it just spawns a new enemy every second. We're going to reuse this code. I'm going to move it over here. But what enemies and how often we spawn are going to be a little more complicated, and we're going to use our old friend, the timeline. So I'm going to create a timeline here, and I'm going to call it Wave 1 Timeline. So this is our Wave 1 timeline. And instead of having our event be set on a timer and have a spawn and all this, I'm going to call this custom event Spawn Wave 1. And I'm going to make it play the timeline. And up here, instead of setting our timer by the event, I'm just going to say, when we begin play, we're going to spawn wave 1. So this gets a little cleaner. You can just go up here. And then we're going to spawn our wave 1 with this timeline. So I'm going to double click on the timeline, and we've been using a lot of float tracks or vector tracks, but we're going to use this one here with the exclamation point. We're going to add what's called an event track. So here I have an event track, and it has a length, and it has the timeline as normal. I'm going to go ahead and make the length 10 for 10 seconds. And one thing you may notice as I move this timeline around, I'm going to zoom out here a little bit, is I'm going to start adding points to it. I'm going to add keys to it, and they have a time and they have a value, but it's not drawing a line, and the vertical location doesn't really matter. And I can even put them, I think, like in similar positions and stuff like this. And basically, each time that I am clicking to add a thing, it is creating an event. So this is an event that'll trigger. So as the timeline starts to play, it'll trigger 1, and then it'll wait a little bit, and it'll travel 2, and then it'll do 2 at once, ding, ding, and it'll keep going. So each of these is a spawn, right? And I can name these tracks. So like this is new track 0, and I want to rename it, and I'm going to call this, we'll call this like move and shoot, because that's going to be the type of enemy that I'm going to spawn from it. And if we come back into our event graph, we can see I now have this move and shoot. And instead of giving me, normally when we have a timeline, normally I'll come in here and I'll make a float track and we'll add some things. And when we're here in the event graph, I get sort of a variable that's changing. But this time I actually get a function output. So I can take this move and shoot, and I can attach it here to our spawn AI from class move and shoot. And so every time as it plays in these 10 seconds, it's going to spawn 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to spawn 10 enemies, but it's going to spawn them sort of in a rhythm. So if I go ahead and hit play, it starts. I can see I'm getting some there, and they're coming at me. And so there, if you watched, I just had like 2 spawn at the exact same time. Very good. Now, what's cool is, back here in our Wave 1 timeline, is you can create additional event tracks. So here's a second event track, and I can have this guy be patrol. And again, add a bunch of keys to here. Maybe I'll put like 3 at once right here. Or 4 at once. That'll be crazy. So it's going to have those. And if I go back into my event graph, I now have a patrol event that's coming out. So what I could do is move this guy up. I'm going to Control-C, Control-V to copy him down. And the patrol one is going to spawn a patrol enemy. So I'll open it up here, and I'll look for an enemy patrol and shoot. So these guys move around doing their patrol thing. And if I wanted, again, I could have another thing, and I can close these when I'm not using them. I can have another event track and have this one be called, I don't know, just like turret, which are the guys that don't move but do shoot at me. And let's add some keys here. Now I'm probably going to super die to all of this because this is a lot of enemies, but we will see. Again, I'm going to copy paste and drag over here and change this to just enemy shoot look, which is the guy that should look at me. So I'm going to compile this, and now I should, if I play, I'm getting all sorts of different types of enemies. You can see spawning at the same time. All right. So as you can see, this is our wave 1, and it happens. Now, we still need a couple other things here. So this is our spawn wave 1, and it does this, and it goes for 10 seconds, and then it stops. Now, what we would normally want here is some sort of code to happen when we're done. So we have this finished event that happens when all of these tracks are finished. And what we need is a way for it to check to see if all the enemies are dead. Okay? So I'm going to make a new custom event because we're going to want to trigger it a bunch. I'm going to come, let's say I'm going to come over here. So I make a new custom event, and I'm going to call this Are Enemies Dead? Let me zoom in here. Are enemies dead? Enemies. Are enemies dead? And what we want to do for our Are Enemies Dead check is we are going to get all actors of class. Now, what's nice here is if you remember all the way back in like the second video we did, we made all these enemy types, right? Except all of them inherited from this guy, the enemy base. So I can come right here and choose enemy base, and it's asking me to get all of the actors in my game currently that are based on this enemy base. So it's going to get every single enemy that could possibly be spawning. And what we're going to do is it's going to put them into an array. Now, the cool thing about this is this array we can get the length of. And when the length of the array is 0, there's no enemies. So what we could do here is any number of things. But this is going to constantly ask, are the enemies dead? And, well, we could, for now, I'm going to go ahead and say print string, and I'm going to tell it to print the length of this string, just so I know how many enemies are in the game at a time. And this command isn't going to happen unless we tell it to. So I would say over here, when you're finished, let's set timer by event. And we could say, make it a 1 second looping event. And we'd say this is the event, right? This guy. So after it finishes spawning, every second it's going to check to see how many enemies are there. We could even have it check from the beginning if we wanted to constantly see it. But let's see if I can survive for 10 seconds, and then what happens afterwards. Okay, if you look in the upper corner, you can see it had, after 10 seconds, it started saying how many enemies were there, and then now we have 0. Now what's nice is we can put another check in here. So when it is equal to 0, what are we going to do next? So we could have an array that tells it to play different spawn waves. So we could say anytime, so we could come over here and we could say if the length is less than or equal to 0, like we have here, then we're going to do a thing. So we'll put a branch in here, like this. Now, one thing we could do is we could say, like, hey, is this guy finished? So we could have a variable. So, like, we could make a new variable here called wave1 finished is a Boolean. And the first thing we could have it do if it finishes is we could have it set wave1 finished to true. So over here, we can ask, hey, okay, so all enemies are dead, true, let's branch on is wave1 finished, true. And if it is, then we could do another custom event, and obviously I could make one called custom event. We could make one called wave2, right? And over here, we could say, okay, wave2. Right? And each time you could also have, like, is wave2 finished? If not, you know, do wave2, otherwise do wave3. We could even just have a number that increases here, and each time make it so that instead of wave1 finished, we just have it like, what wave are we on? And that number increases, and we could have a use a switch, just like we did in the boss enemy, and give it some extra pins here, and have it so that, you know, whatever wave we're on that's the wave it starts, and each one is wave 2, wave 3, wave 4. And it goes to different waves, and then eventually when the player dies, you could even say what wave they die on, because now what wave they're on is a variable. So there's a bunch of different ways to use this and continue using it, but the timeline with multiple event tracks lets you get really complicated and interesting, so you could have your first wave just be silly and simple enemies, and ramp it up to being hard enemies and even the boss. And this command, get all actors of class, is really useful for checking to see if all your enemies are dead before you do stuff, or before you have a level end, or before you show the score, or before you spawn the next wave or the next boss, or whatever.